of domestic rabbits. It was deployed in 1950 in Australia, where a dozen or so domestic rabbits released on a hunting estate in 1859 and outperformed all mathematical modeling and become in the hundreds of millions, the fastest known spread of any mammal on Earth. The rabbits wreaked ecological disaster as they ate their way across the country. Shooting them made only a temporary dent in their numbers. Myxoma virus was introduced in the hope of controlling the population. It killed an estimated 500 million rabbits. And in many parts of Australia, it is still illegal to have a pet rabbit. 2 years later, a French doctor, annoyed by rabbits stealing from his garden, caught 2 of them and injected them with myxoma. They bolted, surviving long enough to carry the virus to other rabbits. The disease eventually bloomed across Europe and the United Kingdom, killing almost every rabbit in its path. Eventually, a myxomatous vaccine was developed. The disease is more or less put under control. Myxomatosis did travel to the United States, but for some reason it never got much of a foothold here. Had it established itself, it would have been disastrous, because at that time, in the middle of the last century, rabbits were a significant food source. Most people associated rabbit meat with European diets, but it was once a staple in this country. There are many large commercial rabbit farms in the United States, and rabbit meat was readily available in the supermarket. The biggest processor was and still is Pelfrey's, founded in 1911 by a man who was given a pet rabbit that was pregnant, and according to Pelfrey's corporate history, turned a dilemma into an opportunity. Rabbit meat, which could be cooked like chicken, was appealingly high in protein and low in fat, and back then it was also much cheaper than beef. And raising rabbits is easy. A rabbit can give birth every 30 days. A young rabbit reaches what is known as fire age at 60 days. But even during their heyday as a market product, rabbits weren't treated like other livestock. Because USDA doesn't classify them as such, it has never required rabbit meat to be inspected or graded. After the Second World War, the demand for rabbit meat began to decline. The number of cattle being raised domestically nearly doubled, and beef, which had previously been something of a luxury item, became affordable. The cattle industry, which brings in some $70 billion a year, began promoting beef as a patriotic mainstay of the American dinner table. In the same years, chicken also became widely available. Soon it became the white meat of choice, and then rabbit was marginalized as an occasional dish. Eric Stewart, the executive director of the American Rabbit Breeders Association, also lays the blame for the decline of rabbit meat on the Bugs Bunny cartoon. Created in 1940, Bugs, a sassy, man-sized, gray and white cartoon rabbit, had a leading role in Warden Brothers' Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes. The Bugs Bunny show began in 1960 and ran on network television for 40 years. Stewart believes the generations who had grown up watching Bugs Bunny could not stomach eating rabbit. Then in 1981, pet rabbit ownership got a huge boost with the publication of Your French Law, The King of the Fancy, the Clown of Rabbits, the Ideal Pet. The author, a rabbit owner named Sandy Crook, argued that pet rabbits, which were typically relegated to a hutch in the backyard, made perfect house pets, just like cats and dogs. Rabbits could be kept inside because they could be trained to use a litter box. Many people consider the book the foundational text of the house rabbit movement. Another best-selling manifesto, Marinells Harriman's House Rabbit Handbook, How to Live with an Urban Rabbit, was published 4 years later. The number of rabbits kept as house pets has grown ever since. We don't know exactly how many rabbits there are in the United States, but they are the third most popular pet in the country, behind dogs and cats, and the most popular small pet, beating out hamsters, guinea pigs, and mice. The USDA estimates that there are more than 6.7 million pet rabbits, but the total number of domestic rabbits would depend on whether you're counting only pet rabbits or including rabbits raised for slaughter. Further complicating matters is the category of rabbits raised, say, as a 4-H project, which once the project is done might segue from a pet to meat. Rabbit-related activities are also in the bounds. There are about 5,000 ARBA-sanctioned rabbit shows each year. The largest ones feature more than 25,000 rabbits. There are rabbit fashion shows, which are especially popular in Japan. A show in Yokohama has featured rabbits dressed like Sherlock Holmes, Amelia Earhart, and Santa Claus. In New York City, pet owners organize rabbit play dates in Central Park. Across the country, there are rabbit speed dates, which are opportunities for rabbits to meet and see if they like one another, if an owner is thinking of getting a second or a third or a fourth. The typical American owner has more than one rabbit. So to say speed dating is important because rabbits, despite their prodigious ability to multiply, don't always get along with each other. Within 5 years of the emergence of the original form of rabbit hemorrhagic disease in China, a vaccine protecting against RHD had been developed. A number of manufacturers produced vaccines against the strain, including Philidie in France, HIPRA in Spain, and Merck, which is headquartered in New Jersey, that makes the vaccine for the European market. The vaccine has never been offered in the United States. There are only a few RHDV1 cases here, including one in Pennsylvania, which is theorized to come from an Oktoberfest party, where imported rabbit meat was served. If the meat was infected, the virus could have spread to vegetables prepared in the same kitchen, and the vegetable scraps were then fed to the rabbits. Most countries affected by the virus began offering the vaccine. Within a few years, the spread appeared to have been tamped down. But in 2010, in France, rabbits began dying of what turned out to be a mutated version of the virus. The vaccine for the original virus is ineffective against the new strain. This is the RHDV2. Soon it was rampant throughout Europe and Australia. In England, the spread was so vigorous that parents were advised not to let their children bury their dead rabbits in the garden, because while comforting the children, the practice may help circulate the virus. The mortality rate of the new variant appeared to be slightly lower than that of the original, and at first it seemed like good news. But in fact, RHDV2 was even more efficient at spreading, in a sense that more infected rabbits were surviving, and because they might not show symptoms, they weren't being isolated, so they passed along the disease. Vaccines guarding against RHDV2 were developed. In some cases, they were produced in combination with the vaccine that prevents RHDV1. By 2016, they were available in Europe, and vaccinating rabbits became common. The new variant, like the original, first seemed to stay away from the United States, except for a few isolated cases. But in July of 2019, a pet Norwegian dwarf male on Orcas Island near Seattle died with a bloody nose. A veterinarian who saw the rabbit in the clinic was aware of RHD and knew that bloody noses are a symptom. So she called the Washington State Department of Agriculture and reported the death. Susan Curran, education and outreach specialist there, was alarmed because she knew there was an RHDV2 outbreak in British Columbia. So the clinic sent the rabbit's body to a lab for necropsy. Waiting for those results, Kerr's co-workers got called from a number of people on St. Juan Island, about a dozen miles southwest of Orcas. St. Juan is famous for its rabbits. In the 1930s, a commercial breeder there went out of business and released 3,000 rabbits into the wild. They multiplied, became a tourist attraction, and rabbit hunting on Island became so celebrated that in the 60s, Sports Illustrated ran a story about it entitled "Hippity Hop and Away We Go." By 1971, St. Juan Island, which covers just 55 square miles, was home to an estimated 1 million feral domestic rabbits. Kerr's department also received calls from a few nearby islands reporting rabbit deaths. Soon the lab confirmed that the Orcas Island rabbit had died of RHDV2. Kerr then got the news that most of the 145 rabbits at a facility in the Olympic Peninsula across Puget Sound from the island had also died in a 3-week period. Their symptoms also sound like RHDV2, the virus, so the virus was traveling. As a precaution, rabbits and rabbit products were banned from the ferry system that services Puget Sound. A colleague of Kerr's posted about the outbreak on an online animal health newsletter and was inundated with requests from owners who knew that a vaccine existed and asking how they could get their rabbits inoculated. But the vaccine for RHDV2, like the one for the original virus, was available only overseas. No company had a license to distribute it here in the States. The USDA opposed importing it except for limited special circumstances. One problem is that the attempt to produce the vaccine on cell lines in a laboratory have failed. So Merck produces a vaccine in cells, but it's a live genetically modified vaccine, which is not permitted in this country. The other companies that generally manufacture the RHD vaccine produce it by infecting live rabbits with RHD. When the rabbits die, the vaccines are made from their livers. According to the spokesman for Flavia, the French company, one rabbit yields several thousand vaccine doses. The USDA also maintained that vaccinating some rabbits would make it difficult to distinguish between sick rabbits and those with antibodies produced by the vaccine. Although since most sick rabbits died, the distinction would actually be very clear. In the rabbit community, the department's mulishness was infuriating. Some people said they reflected a bad attitude toward rabbits, seeing them as disposable goods and easily replaced. Others thought that the department simply didn't want to manage all the paperwork required to bring a vaccine from overseas, or just didn't want to acknowledge that the virus was even present in the U.S. The USDA finally agreed to consider requests for the emergency importation of limited amounts of the vaccine, but only if veterinarians applied first to their state veterinarians. Leaving the question of the vaccine to the states, though, meant there could be 50 different decisions on it, a patchwork of guidelines for the disease that would travel with no regard to borders. A number of veterinarians said they were interested in applying to import the vaccine, but once they discovered the headaches involved, most of them gave up. Elisa McLaughlin, one of the medical directors of the Center for Bird and Exotic Animal Medicine in Bothell, Washington, was the first veterinarian in the country to obtain the vaccine, which she ordered from Philly in France. She too had heard about the RHDV2 outbreak in British Columbia, so she started researching how to get the vaccine. She compiled a list of several hundred clients who requested it. I knew the vaccine would get here, she said recently. Once it was in I misquoted. She said, I knew the virus would get here, she said recently. Once it was in British Columbia, it was just a matter of time. She applied to the Washington State Veterinarian, was shuttled around for a month between state agriculture departments, the USDA, finally had to manage language and time zone barriers, then eventually had to hire a customs broker to shepherd the virus and the virus's vaccines across borders. Finally, more than 4 months after she applied, she received 500 doses of the Filovax VHGK C+V, which protects against both V1 and V2. By the time McLaughlin was finally able to administer the vaccine to her clients in April, concerns over COVID-19 had meant she could only offer curbside service and had to struggle to find personal protective equipment which she needed because she was interested in interacting with both patients and handling their animals for them. Around this time, the Center for Avian and Exotic Medicine in Manhattan had been thoroughly sanitized after its RHDV2 outbreak. To be absolutely sure it was not contaminated, Alex Wilson brought 2 rabbits to live at the clinic as samples. Because the virus was so contagious, the rabbits would almost certainly come down with RHDV2 if it was still in the facility. No one wants to bring rabbits in to die, but it was one sure way in veterinary medicine to prove that the cleanup has worked. The rabbits survived. Wilson then applied to import the vaccine, and she received a letter from the USDA saying that without evidence of widespread infection, the risk was low since the department maintained household rabbits in their contact with others. Some of the clinic's clients were furious that there had been a few days delay between the first rabbit's death and when the clinic put out word about the diagnosis. According to Wilson, the clinic couldn't have done it any faster since it had to wait to hear the results of the necropsy. The fact that even after the mention of RHG panics rabbits' owners, and the thousands joined the Facebook page to exchange knowledge, vent, and worry. Useful information is interlaced with dread. A chief concern is whether it's safe to let a veterinarian know if you think your rabbit might have this disease, since the veterinarian has to report to a state veterinarian, and the fear, according to New Mexico state veterinarians, is mostly justified. Is that if your rabbit does have the virus and you have other rabbits, you will be required to depopulate. That is, you will have to euthanize them. There is also persistent chatter that the vaccine actually caused the disease as part of a global plot to rid the world of rabbits. Recently, a member of the Facebook group proposed that rabbit owners sue Australia, perhaps conflating the past use of myxoma there with the outbreak of RHG. No, another member replied, we can't sue Australia. As the clinic in New York was reopening, 30 dead rabbits were found near Fort Bliss, Texas. An unusual number of dead rabbits was also found in Australia, in Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. Along with pet rabbits and a small rabbit meat industry, the Southwest has a large population of black, wild jackrabbits and cocktails. Although they resemble domestic rabbits, these are different species entirely, and they cannot interbreed with domestic rabbits. Nor are they susceptible to all the same diseases. In fact, they seem immune to RHGB1. But RHGB2 made a cross-species leap, and in March, jackrabbits and cottontails throughout the Southwest began dying in droves. I've gotten reports it's in thousands, Zimmerman said recently. I'm sure the next I'll be hearing is that it's in the tens of thousands. He had scraped together money from New Mexico's state budget to import 500 doses of the vaccine, which he would distribute to veterinarians across the state. He assumed that those doses would go to high-dollar breeding animals. But nothing can help the wild rabbits. Some vaccines, such as the one for rabies, can be distributed to wild animals like putting it out as food. But the vaccine for rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus has to be given by injection and repeated every year. The concern is not only that many wild rabbits could be lost. The problem is that what happens to them reverberates into other animals, including foxes, bobcats, wolves, and hawks, since rabbits are their chief protein source. Once they've run out of rabbits, cats and poodles become their preferred food. But if there's not enough wayward cats and poodles to go around, they'll starve. In the past 3 months, RHGB2 has shown up in 7 western states. Now it has jumped to wild rabbits. Most veterinarians I've spoken to believe that is here to stay. The USDA should change its designation from a foreign animal disease to one that's endemic. There have been a few lucky breaks. For example, the big rabbit show scheduled for the spring, which should have brought together tens of thousands of rabbits, which should have been a recipe for contagions, were canceled because of COVID. Nevertheless, RHGB2 is advancing unabated. The National Assembly of State Animal Health Officials, which represents all state veterinarians, recently formed a working group to evaluate the vaccine and make recommendations to the public. The group has not released its report yet, but I recently got an email from Annette Jones, a California state veterinarian, who is vice president of the assembly, saying, yes, we should have the vaccine available. Yes, we're hoping a vaccine manufacturer steps up and applies to USDA for a license. But no manufacturer in America has applied so far. At least one has contacted the American Rabbit Association, Breeders Association, to feel out interest. It's hard to get these companies interested in rabbit medicine. All the money is in cats and dogs. In fact, the fact that people tend to own rabbits in multiples makes the economics of selling a vaccine complicated. Pet owners of 1 or 2 rabbits might not shy away from a vaccine that costs them $30 per shot. But many owners have 20 or 30 or 200 rabbits, so the cost becomes prohibitive. Cost and availability are not the only challenges. I'm worried there's a controversy that money died to make the vaccine, Melissa McLaughlin told me. This vaccine is the only option we have at the moment, so it's frustrating. The House Rabbit Society, a rabbit rescue and education organization, posted a letter on its website noting the rabbits die in the manufacturing process, urging members to consider whether RHGB2 vaccines are right for you and your family. Natalie Reeson is eager to vaccinate her current rabbit, Radar, as soon as possible. She has never skimped when it comes to a rabbit. She spent thousands of dollars in veterinary care for Mopsy, her rabbit with the tan fur, who suffers from lymphoma. I just learned information tonight that's very disturbing. She wrote me an email. I don't know whether I couldn't, in good conscience, vaccinate my rabbit, knowing it would be contribute to the death of the others who actually had been killed to produce the vaccine. Because RHGB2 is poised to become endemic in the United States, the vaccine, which is the one thing that may stop it, is now caught up in the contradictions of rabbits. When I first spoke to Reeve, she mentioned that the rabbits are most discriminated against of all domestic animals. Ridiculed for their lustiness, used as expendable, lumped in with oddball animals like chinchillas and prairie dogs, always subject to question whether they're pets or meat. She viewed the vaccine was just more example of the peculiarity of their place in the world. Would dog owners be expected to use the medicine that was produced by killing a dog? Once again, rabbits seem to be betwixt and between. As Roth Zimmerman put it, rabbits are just a real conundrum. Okay, so that ends the article. I guess people are wondering, why did she want to read this article?
Margherita, if you don't mind, we're going to unmute everybody and have a discussion.
Yeah, because I think that this lends it to somehow I got, whoops.
Everybody can unmute themselves. We cannot unmute people remotely.
Oh, okay. So if people would unmute themselves.
Okay.
So I'll start the conversation, Margarita. Uh, what's the implication for humans?
Well, a couple. If you notice that when they first noticed the rabbits got sick in New York City, they initially thought this was an isolated example. But then soon, this disease seemed to have pockets elsewhere. Texas, the West Coast. If you think about what happened with COVID, there was an isolated episode in a nursing home in Washington State, and then suddenly we had pockets of it elsewhere. The disease didn't start in Washington State and spread elsewhere. It started somewhere, some unknown place.
They, yeah, I'm going, I'm sorry, Margaret. They still don't know, am I correct, that how COVID went from, whether it was bats or whatever, to humans, how it made that jump, or am I wrong?
Right, and I mean that's one of the disturbing things. Is a lot of the illnesses we're seeing now that become pandemic. Think about MERS and SARS and now COVID are viruses that made the jump from some unknown animal reservoir to humans. So when we see something like this animal virus, the rabbit hemorrhagic fever, the big question is it's already jumped from a domestic rabbit to a wild rabbit, and they thought that wasn't even possible.
Mm-hmm.
Next potential jumps, the wild rabbits get eaten by wolves. The wolves attack pets. The pet brings the pet cat or dog brings the virus into your household. So far, humans have not gotten infected, but you can see the potential for disaster is here. And also, the USDA and the veterinarians and the rabbit owners are not dealing with the animal virus any better than we're dealing with the human virus.
Right.
It's a kind of uncomfortable cautionary tale.
Yeah. And I haven't been able to put, apparently there's something about these viruses and they're getting more prevalent and it's more likely they'll jump to humans, but I haven't been able to understand why that is. But I've read several articles that suggest that.
Yeah, and I've read a few articles also. A couple of the thoughts about that is that a lot of places in the world, humans are interfering with wild, not just animals, but wild ecology. They're going to areas of the world that usually were just the province of wild species and not have many humans, but humans go into these areas, they take animals out in areas, say, of China and Africa, and maybe even in the US, they then use these animals as food, they grow them. There are a lot of wild markets, say, in different areas of the world, including China. There's a bat virus hunter in China, a woman who has a research lab who went looking around in bat caves near some small towns in the rural parts of China and discovered hundreds of these viruses. And her comment was that luckily most of them do not seem to be able to jump to other species, but yet some of them do. In fact, one of the thoughts about how COVID got started is it jumped from a bat to a civet, which is a kind of a cat-like creature that's often sold for food in wild markets in China.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that that's happening is that first of all, people are hungry, so that they go hunt. But the other reasons we're kind of going to these spaces that we hadn't normally gone to and inserting ourselves into an ecology where we aren't welcome, and the viruses are happily letting us take them along.
Right. The best thing that ever happened to a virus.
Oh, sure. I mean, also, viruses are spreading for another reason. The climate is changing, so precipitation patterns are changing. The heat levels in different areas of the world are changing. We're seeing levels of precipitation and temperature rises, which are unusual. So viruses, I mean, this is great for viruses as well as for other infectious diseases. This is a culture dish, and they're happily spreading in it.
Right.
It's to their advantage. It's not to our advantage, because we're going to be the next victims. So when I read an article like this, I thought, if this virus spreads to humans, this is horrible. This is going to be the new Ebola.
Right.
So are we worried because there's so many rabbits and so many cases of this disease? Is that the fear that sooner or later the virus could mutate and then cause problems for humans?
Yeah. Because if you think about it, it spread from domestic rabbits to wild rabbits, and they didn't think that jump was possible. But once we're in that area, wild rabbits are food for a lot of different species. Some of those species might even be animals that people hunt for wild food and eat.
I don't want to be held to this, but I'm pretty sure that the Black Death was a hemorrhagic disease. I'll check myself, but I'm pretty sure I've read that.
The rats?
No, it was a hemorrhagic disease. In other words, the symptoms that people had were bleeding, and in fact, while we're talking, I'll look it up.
So where did you find that out?
No. I don't do a bibliography on my crazy reading. See if I can find it. Don't wait for me, guys.
Any other comments that people want to make about RHVD2? Well, Marguerite, thank you so much for reading this. It was a fascinating article that I knew nothing about.
Oh yeah.
And
It was nice.
it was an article that stimulated a lot of thought, and I didn't realize the whole rabbits were the third most popular pet. I didn't realize how many there were, and the part when the disease went from domesticated to wild rabbits is where I got the chills, because
Yeah, that bothered me because at this point, since one of the comments in the article is the vaccine has to be given by injection, now that it's in a reservoir of wild animals, they have no way of controlling it.
yeah. Well, I guess we just have to do the best we can, keep our fingers crossed.
Don't eat rabbit meat for dinner.